Good morning, everybody. Kiddos, you guys can go ahead, head out with Miss Chris, or you're welcome to stay if your parents want you to stay. That's fine too. But Chris is back there. She'll be doing the kids' teaching time. All right. So, if you don't know me, my name is Jordan. I'm part of the pastoral team here at Bridgepoint. So, we're kind of in the middle of this time together where we're focusing on prayer. And I'll just kind of reset the stage, and then I'll get out of the way because we've got two guys that are sharing this morning. But just so that we're kind of entering into this with a similar framework. What you hear up here during this time will not teach you everything that you need to know and understand about prayer. Yeah, there was this. From people that are more seasoned than me, they say it's a lifelong pursuit of the Lord and understanding how to commune with Him, abide with Him, spend time with Him, hear from Him, talk to Him, all that good stuff. So that's in no way a negative or anything. It's more of an invitation of like together we're walking through this prayer, really through storytelling and through you guys all getting to hear from the elder board during this time and just sharing our hearts of the things that we've experienced and that we wanted to share with you all. So that's one aspect. Then the second thing is I threw this out here a couple weeks ago, the first time that I shared, and it was really an invitation, more of an active participation, is asking God, what do you have for me to learn about prayer over the next few weeks? And then what's a question that you have had about prayer that you've never really gotten answered? So I just kind of re-invite us to that, to reflect upon these things, because I believe wholeheartedly God has a specific thing for each and every one of us, and multiple things, obviously. So today we're going to hear from Will and Bill. I thought that was a fun pairing. So we've got William and William this morning. They are both members of the elder board here at Bridgepoint. And so they're going to share about just some of their own personal testimony, experience, stuff that they have with this material that we went through together as a board. And then the other aspect I wanted to mention is Pastor Jay and Denise. They are my parents, if you're not familiar with that. But they are in Thailand still. They'll be there for about another 2 weeks or so. Pastor Jay sent me a message this morning, and I think it was meant to intimidate me or scare me. But he said he went to a church over there, and the pastor taught for 90 minutes. But that's like, it was like a 3-hour, service. And he was like, but they taught for 90 minutes. And I kind of asked him, I was like, you're not trying to do that here, are you? Like, 90 seems a little much. But he shared all sorts of cool stories, amazing stuff that he's seen God doing in our teams over there. And so they'll share when they get back. It'll be neat to just hear from them what they got to be a part of while they were over there. All right, well, we'll kick it off with Will.
Good morning. Like Jordan said, my name is Will, and I have the privilege to serve on the staff here at Bridgepoint in numerous ways, from the youth to the elder board, to worship with my wife, Bridget, and we've got 2 lovely children, Oliver and Penelope, and we're just. If anyone knows the season of little ones at home, and we're just in that right now, and it's been a blessing. And so, wanted to again, we've been going through this book, Draw the Circle by Mark Batterson, the 40-day prayer challenge. When we finished up this book with the elders, for me, ultimately at the end of it, it was very eye-opening. It was like a breath of fresh air. It was convicting in terms of looking at my own specific prayer life, my own relationship with the Father, with the Lord. And if you got the book, great, but there are so many God stories that are inspiring in it, that are, you read and it's like, wow, that really happened. God did that. Or this scenario was happening and then God did this. And again, it made me reflect on my own prayer life, and specifically intimacy with the Father, and what that looks like on a daily basis, what that looks like with the season of life that I'm living in. Also reflecting on the many seasons of life that I've been through up until this point. What does intimacy with the Father look like through prayer, through a daily communication with our Father? And so I look back on, I'm 32 years old, and throughout the 30 plus years I've been on this earth, there have been many seasons of my life. Anywhere from my childhood growing up in a Christian home, growing up in the church, growing up going to church, believing in Jesus at a very young age, then going off to college, and kind of maybe looking towards worldly things, not to get into specifics, but looking at, other things outside the church, whatever it may be. And so that was a season of life. And then I look at, after I graduate college, looking at that season of life of being very more career focused, looking at what I'm doing, how am I getting ahead, how am I just getting to that next level within a specific job or within a specific career. And then God really radically changed my life in my mid-20s, where I did the World Race. And the World Race, if you guys don't know, it's an 11-month mission trip to 11 different countries. And so what I did was I quit my job, I sold most of my things, and I signed up for this journey. I had no idea what to expect, what to really think about what was going to happen on these 11 months. And so I'll get more into some of the details and some stories throughout that, but that was a season of my life. And then after the World Race, God led me here. God led me to my wife. God led me to a season of marriage, a season of one child, then a season of two children, up to today. And so looking back on those multiple seasons of my life, with various seasons between each of those ones that I described, this book really made me reflect on what had my prayer life been throughout those seasons. Throughout, I look at it as like a, one season might be, I might be on the top of the mountain. And then another season I might be in this deep valley. And then the next season I might be climbing up the mountain. And then the next season kind of descending into more of a deep valley. And that's kind of how I have reflected and understood and really processed what my past prayer life has been after reading this book. And so going back to the World Race, and it wasn't until then that I really understood and developed what a true relationship with the Lord is, what a personal relationship is with the Father, what intimacy actually is with the Father. And so throughout this book, this idea, when I first learned about it a few years back, came to mind. And if you got your Bibles, we're going to go into Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9. But it was about halfway through the race, and we had been really focused on, one, we're going out and helping so many different organizations in the world, whatever country we're in. We're helping people, we're serving, but we're also learning about our own life. We're learning about how we, as Christian believers, are intimate with the Father, whether that's within prayer, whether that's within worship, whether that's within service to others. And so it was an amazing time, and about halfway through, intimacy kind of really just hit me right in the face. And if we look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9, obviously this is the fall. This is where sin comes into the world. And so verse 8 says, we all know the story of, verse 8 says, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. And they hid themselves from the Lord among the trees of the garden. So the Lord called out to the man and said to him, where are you? So verse 8 says, what does God do in verse 8? Verse 8, it says, the Lord God was walking. That kind of struck me because you don't really think of God as walking somewhere. You think God, he's everywhere. Why would he need to walk? Why would he need to walk to us when he can be in our heart? He can be wherever we're at in the world. He can be with us wherever. Why is he walking? He's looking for Adam and Eve. He's looking for the two humans that he created at the beginning of the world. He's looking for them. He's coming after them. He's the one pursuing them. He's the one that is wanting to talk to them. And so what I took from that to when I was on the race, learning, just really reflecting about myself and my relationship with the Lord, is that he is chasing after me. He's chasing after me, who I might be, just, living my own life, doing my own thing, maybe going to church once in a while, or maybe not. But I think in this verse, it's reflective of how God, back then was looking for Adam and Eve, was chasing after them. Even today, he's chasing after me. He's chasing after us. He's the one taking that first step and looking for us. And then it says in verse 9, the Lord God called out and asked a question. And what does he ask? He says, where are you? And this kind of struck me as well, because if you think about someone asks you a question, or you think about a question being asked, what is going to happen in return? You're expecting an answer. You're expecting, you ask someone a question, you're expecting them to answer. Someone asks you a question, they're expecting you to have an answer, whatever the question may be. But who is asking this question? God is asking this question. Do you think God needs to ask the question? Do you think God doesn't know the answer of what happened, of what Adam and Eve did? God is asking this question to call out to his people, to call out to us, to call out to me. He doesn't need to ask the question because he knows. He knows everything. He knows our past. He knows our present. He knows our future. He knows exactly what we're going to do today. He knows exactly what we're going to do in 10 years from now. So why does he ask this question? He asks this question because he, again, is wanting to call out to his people. He's wanting to use this as a beckoning call from his heart to ours. Even though we've messed up, just as in Adam and Eve from the beginning, we keep messing up, in today's world. But he is wanting us. He wants us to know, and wants us to know that he is chasing after us. He is calling out to us, and he's wanting that personal relationship. He's wanting that intimacy. Going back to that, and this had me think about, again, on the race, but even now, what is my intimacy with the Lord look like? And this question also came up as well. Am I running toward God just as he is chasing after me? Am I running towards God just as he is chasing after me? Just as he chased Adam and Eve in the garden from the beginning, just as he is chasing us as believers right now, desiring us to be in communication, which then is leading towards desiring us to be in prayer, desiring us to be in prayerful communication, whether that's whatever that looks like, whether that's the first thing you do when you wake up, whether that's in the middle of the day when you have some time, or if it's toward the end of the night and you just remember to do it. He is wanting that communication, that intimacy, that relationship. And and one of those aspects is prayer. There's so many other ways to have intimacy with the Lord, whether that's through worship, whether that's through service, whether that's through being out in nature. Prayer is just one way that we can communicate with the Lord, and it's one way we can build and solidify that relationship, that personal relationship, and that intimacy. And so in my current season of life, what does prayer look like? What does my relationship look like? And what does my communication look like with the Father? And those are the big things that, after reading this book, really has been really pressing on my mind and my heart. And kind of just reflecting, again, reading back into Genesis, initially when God chased after Adam and Eve, he's also chasing after me. He's also chasing after us. So that was the first thing I wanted to kind of point out in my more personal testimony of how this book has impacted my life. And then the second thing, one of the days kind of stood out to me is, and I'll kind of preface it with this question, but essentially it's going to revolve around this question that he put in the book. How big is your God? And it kind of hit me a little bit in the prayers that I'm praying. Do I truly believe God is so big to answer the biggest needs and asks, all the way down to the smallest needs and asks? When I was on the race, we went to the country, we went to Nepal, which is just north of India. And we had just been in Africa, which was 100 degrees. And we fly to Nepal, and it's like 40. And we basically, when we travel, we basically had 2 backpacks. And so, there's a limited number of things you could take. Mostly, we were in very warm climates. This happened to be one country that just was the exact opposite. So we get there, we got to buy all new clothes, we got to bundle up. And then myself and a couple others had the opportunity to hike to the base camp of Mount Everest. And if anyone knows just, about climbing, about hiking, obviously Mount Everest being the tallest mountain in the world, we didn't actually climb to Mount Everest, but there's this initial hike that you do to essentially get to the base camp. You got to get up to the place where they start the actual hike to the top of Everest. And it's something that a ton of people do, strive to do, and I would say it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Just even from the flight, you basically, you're in the capital city, then you got to take another flight, and they built this airport on the side of a mountain, and the runway is, so short. I mean, it's probably the length of 2 of these parking lots, and it's amazing how these pilots can just quickly land a plane and also just make sure it just doesn't go into the face of the mountain. But nonetheless, a couple of us decided to make this trek, to do this as our month of ministry, and just to see what God does. And so you have to hire a guide. You basically have to hire Sherpas, which are these men that essentially carry your luggage for you. Each one of us gets 1 bag, and you're making this climb. It's an 11-day journey to where you have different cities that you stop in. And it's the elevation is severe in terms of, for us just being used to mostly sea level, you're climbing up thousands upon thousands of meters, sometimes on a daily basis. But what we do is acclimation trips to where we'll start in one city, we'll take a trip up and a trip back down in one day, and that essentially helps our bodies get used to that certain elevation climb. And so this is about halfway through the trip, and we're staying in this city, in this little town, I should say, and one of our teammates was a nurse, and all of a sudden, someone came up to us and said, "Hey, Rachel, are you a nurse?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "There's a man in one of the rooms that isn't doing too well." And so she kind of got up and went over and checked on him. And this man, essentially, what was happening was he was having severe altitude sickness. Fluid was building up in his lungs, and Rachel basically said, if he doesn't get help within the next 2 to 3 hours, he's gonna die. He's just basically gonna not be able to breathe. And so we kind of were like, oh wow, this is serious. This is like something we would maybe see on TV or see in a movie. And so there's 6 of us. We're kind of like, all right. Also, background, this man is a Chinese man who doesn't speak any English. Was there by himself, didn't hire a guide, didn't hire any help, didn't even have insurance to even call a helicopter to come medevac him out. And so our first response in terms of like where we were, what our resources were, what we had, and what we could do, we started praying. First, we started praying outside of the room. And then there was also a bunch of other Nepalese people trying to figure out like what to do, how do we get a helicopter, all of that. And then we decided, all right, let's go into the room and start praying, and let's lay hands on him. Let's actually be physically praying for this man. And as we're all praying, we're kind of like just taking turns in a circle praying. And I didn't notice this as I was more just like, my eyes were closed. I was just like, kind of just being in that moment. One of our teammates said, as we were praying, as one of us was praying, they noticed this man would open his eyes and look directly at the person that was praying. And didn't say anything, not sure if he understood it, as he didn't speak any English, but he would look directly at whoever was actually speaking in English and praying for him. And so that was like, I didn't know that until after the whole incident. And after, long story short, we finally got a helicopter up there, able to call a helicopter up there. He got med-flighted back down to the capital city, and he actually survived. We were able to confirm that. But that actual moment, and again, I didn't know that he was looking at whoever was specifically praying when we did pray for him until after. I think back on that event and that story, and me personally, how eye-opening that journey was up and down that mountain. Referencing back to this question, how big is your God? How big do we think he is? I think about my life right now, and sometimes honestly, I think I can do everything. I don't need necessarily the strength of the Lord to get me through my day, to get me through my week. And in a way that can kind of almost belittle God. And maybe in my mind, I'm thinking how small God is. But reading this chapter in that day where he put that question, how big is your God? That really kind of hit me. And again, really made me reflect on what my prayers look like, what I'm actually praying for. Another quick story before I hand it off to Bill. Our son Oliver, when he was in the womb, we had an ultrasound done, and he essentially was diagnosed with hydrocephalus. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's buildup of fluid inside the brain. And they saw it through an ultrasound. Then we went down to Madison to get some MRIs, met with a pediatric neuro doctor. And I mean, it was crushing when we first found that out. It was like, what did we do? What's happening? What do we do? What do we need to do next? Is there surgery, needed after he's born? But after, thankfully, we go through the whole pregnancy, and he's born, and then they check him right away. Then we have a 1-month checkup, and essentially they said it kind of went away. It kind of just dissipated. And so I think back on that miracle and how God can just, on both those stories, our son, Oliver, and then this man that we didn't even know on Everest, how big God is just in my own life, but then how big God is collectively in our community, collectively in our church. And I'm sure there's thousands of stories just within our own little circle of friends that God does miraculous things. And so, this book was again, refreshing, convicting, and I think is really gonna, at least for me specifically, in my walk with the Lord, my intimacy, my prayer life, is gonna kind of give me that push towards running after God, just because He's also chasing after me, and realizing God is massive. God is so big. It's bigger than we can. He's bigger than we can actually comprehend in our own minds. And so, wanted to kind of leave you guys with those stories and those questions as my takeaways from this book. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I get asked to go last amongst the elders, so I can just say ditto, right? Am I good? Ditto to everything. That's 90 minutes right there. Yes, Jim, thank you. No, I'll say a little bit more than that, actually. When we started this, we heard from Mike, who acknowledged, see, we're just so on this whole thing, Mike. Am I paraphrasing? Josh gets up next. He's like, I was so pumped. I was so excited. I got the book, and I started challenging the other elders. Get your book. Get your book. Josh isn't here today. He's in Costa Rica, so I can say this. I was kind. I didn't say, dude, I already have the book. Didn't want to bust his bubble that I already had the book at that point. So I just said, good for you, Josh. And I'm like, I got my book already. Mike had to start the conversation, everyone, because he was the tech guy who had the access to the account. Josh acknowledged he missed a few days. I'm going to acknowledge I may have missed a few days as well. So kind of the same there. Then when Jay asked us to share in church, I'm like, can you give me something I'm good at to share? That would be awesome. So I'm not that good at prayer. Well, Bill, you're an elder. Yes, I am an elder. Brings me back to Romans 3:23. We all fall short of God's glorious standards. So even if I am this prayer warrior, I'm falling short of God's standards, right? And I need God's grace, and thankfully we have God's grace as we kind of go through this. I'm excited about the book. Our small group actually starts Tuesday night. We're walking through this book together as a small group, so I'm super excited about that. And the whole concept of prayer is kind of overwhelming. It's like, oh man, what am I doing here? How do I pray? And I'm going to start with a quote from the book that I loved. First of all, I'm going to ask a question. How many of you know where I was last week? Just a few. Why do you know that? Yeah, I'm glad my wife raised her hand because she was with me. I'm like, good deal. All right. You know that because I communicate with you. And this sounds like it's some big deal, but what is prayer? It's talking to the Father. It's communicating. And those of you who I talked to know where I was because it's something that I talked about. Favorite quote from the book was this: if you want to know God's will, because we say, thy will be done, but what is thy will, God? What do you want? What are your plans? What are your plans versus my plans? Very simply put, if you want to know God's will, if you want to know God's plans, you have to be in His presence. You have to talk to God. Prayer is not some magical, difficult thing. You need to talk. It's about communication with the Father. So that kind of was like, okay, it's not as hard as I thought, but it's still a real challenge. So I'm going to go back to, I had 3 takeaways. I'm actually going to do 4 because I'm an overachiever. But one of them I'm just piggybacking off of something Josh said last time. Will talked about nothing too big to pray for. One of the things that struck me was the book said nothing is too small to pray for. So I think back as a parent, and those of you who are parents or are going to be parents, great. Those of you who weren't, you were a kid at one time. So hopefully you can think back to that time when you were a kid. Think of going to a grocery store and your son or daughter saying, I want this. Can I have this? Can I have that? Can we go here? Can we do this? Can he, please, give me, all these things. It's like, stop, you're exhausting me with all these questions. Am I alone in that? All right, I'm alone in that. I'll take that. So as a father, I felt that way. Like, gosh, they keep asking for things. Well, guess what? That's an earthly father. That's not a heavenly father. That's not God at all. In fact, in Philippians 4, 6 through 7, Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." In every situation, not just the big ones. So yes, we go to God with the big stuff, but what about the small stuff? And again, I kind of seem to hold back, in part because I don't want to nag God here. I don't want to be in his face all the time. Paul's saying in every situation, not just the big stuff. Then we get into this part of arrogance that, well, I can solve this problem. I don't need God's help on this. I got this. A couple of men smiled when I said that, so I think there's a guy component to it. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from the wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will hear their land." If they will humble themselves and pray. And if you're going to pray, by definition, you're humbling yourself. You're saying, God, I need help here. I don't have this all figured out. Help me. That's being humble and praying. So again, for me, part of it is this arrogance. I don't need help. I got this with the small things. I don't. God's got a better plan. And I need to seek that first. The other thing that really struck with me about the word humble this week was my wife and I, we drove, my son drove, we didn't drive. Yeah, my wife's going, yeah. My son gets us in his four-wheel drive, and we're going up this mountain pass. And then we get to where the road ends, and Jake says, well, the road doesn't end, the trail starts here, And we get up to the top of this mountain, and our core is sore from holding on in this SUV as we went up the hill. We got up to the top, and we saw a 360-degree view of snow-covered mountains from every angle. And we watched the sunset below the mountains, and the clouds just light up. If ever you want to feel small, we'll give you the location of this place, because you want to humble yourself before the Father and just look at his creation in complete and utter awe. And the song Indescribable was going through my head from Chris Tomlin, because it was indescribable. Just super, super humbling and amazing at the same time to see that. Point number 2 from the book for me was about commitment to prayer. A gentleman named Wayne was talking about his grandmother. Grandma had 12 kids. Praise God. I'm like, wow, that's about too many. Anyway, it says a lot about people to be able to have that many kids. I can't even imagine. She made breakfast, lunch, and dinner for these kids. And she would make breakfast, and she would go to the room, her bedroom, which was right off the kitchen, and pray for each kid by name, loud enough that they could hear. She did that after making breakfast. She did that after making lunch. She did that after making dinner. The prayers that she gave them was that each child would, quote, surrender to the lordship of Jesus Christ. I love that. Not just that they would know Christ, but that they would surrender to the lordship of Christ. So this story was talking about her commitment to prayer, and one of the other elders had mentioned that your prayers don't stop when you pass away. So when this lady died, 6 of her kids knew Christ, 6 did not. Fast forward, 11 out of the 12 had a relationship with Christ long after she died. And number 12, his name was Johnny, the oldest. And there's a knock on Johnny's door one day, and there's a neighbor, and she said, Johnny, you may think this is crazy, but I'm praying and I'm hearing you've got to invite Johnny to church today. Would you come to church with me today? Johnny says, sure, why not? And he walked into church, and he heard an audible voice of his mother praying for him to surrender to the lordship of Jesus Christ. He heard it over and over and over again. At the end of the service, the pastor said, anyone who wants to accept Christ, please come forward. Johnny's like, I have to do this. And at age 92, he hobbled up and accepted Christ that day. Wayne continues with the story to say, he did some simple math, knowing how old his mom was and how old his kids were, how old Johnny was when she died, and he calculated that she prayed 84,315 times for Johnny to know Christ. That's about 84,310 times more than I pray for things. So I'm just doing that math going, wow, can you imagine? That's just so powerful. So powerful. Number 3, final one, after I get to my bonus one, I actually feel good about this one. I actually can look in the mirror and go, gosh, I feel okay on this one now, and that's to journal. Now, when the author suggested journaling, I'm like, I don't journal. I'm gonna try. So I wrote down a few prayers in my journal, and then life happened, and then I stopped, and then I got convicted about partway through, and I wrote down a couple more, and I stopped, and I'm like, this is hard. It shouldn't be, but it was for me. I have gotten into the habit of that. It took after the book was done, and I started up journaling again. And the concept of the journal is this. We short God when we don't acknowledge the answers to our prayers. We're cheating him of that. And so as I started journaling and putting down a date, putting down my prayer request, I went back over it and I'm like, that prayer was answered. And without my journal, I probably would have forgotten that I prayed for it in the first time, because I remember about 2 weeks back and then my mind just kind of goes, forget things. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I continued. And there was one situation at the food pantries. You guys know we're praying for new space. And the planets were aligning, right? Where someone we knew who had space available called us and said, hey, we want to talk to you guys. And we're like, this is it. This is it. God answered this prayer. I know it. And it had nothing to do with that. So another point of the book is either there's no and there's not now. And God knows better. And what this guy wanted to talk to us about was big. And we're like, okay, God, is that an answered prayer? Does God saying you don't need a space right now? Is it going to happen or not? The point is, having that journal really caused me to dive into those things and read through those prayers. Am I praying for the right thing? Am I praying that this be God's will? So for me personally, I do it on my phone, because I have my phone with me at all times. If I had a sheet of paper, I'd forget to write it down at some point. So whatever works for you, I'm just going to encourage you to try it. The last word in my prayer journal is the word listen. That's harder than journaling for me, frankly. So when I finish reading through my prayers, I'm stopping, I'm just reading that word listen and understanding if I want to hear from God, I need to talk to God, I need to start the conversation with him, and then I need to listen. So it's been really powerful for me. I've got a long way to go on journaling. There's a lot of things in the book that I'm really excited about that many of the other elders have mentioned before, which has been really cool. So here comes the bonus one. Is that me? No, okay. I was just saying. Bonus one is this. Josh had mentioned it. One of the chapters of the book, so you guys know it's a 40-chapter book. Each chapter is 4 or 5 pages, Mike. It's not a big, long chapter. It's day by day. And one of them, the title of the chapter was Stop Praying. I'm like, wait, this is a book on prayer, right? Stop praying. That's kind of interesting. And it talked about how God answers prayers, and God answers prayers through other people. And sometimes we join into prayer with someone for something, but in reality, we're the answer to that prayer. And the example that he gave was this guy had a computer, and he knew a friend of his who said, hey, can you pray for me? I need a computer. And the pastor's like, yeah, man, I'll pray for you. Wait a minute, I have a computer that I don't need. So maybe you are not to pray for someone. Maybe you are the answer to their prayers as God works through us. So it caused me then to evaluate, and I went back through my prayer list, again, since I have a journal, and I'm like, which of these things am I called to pray for that person, or which am I called to be the answer to that person's prayers? So that also is kind of convicting, quite frankly. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up for one last song. And our small group, if you're here today, hopefully you've gotten the book. If not, we can get it or I can get a book for you. But I'm super excited about it. I could have talked for hours on this book because there's a lot of really good nuggets in there. So thanks for your time.